On September 1st, 1939, Germany invaded Poland, starting a global conflict that lasted for 6 years. With almost 25 million deaths of military personnel and approximately 55 million innocent civilians losing their lives for no apparent reason, World War II was death, loss, and destruction, and everything humanity would take decades to heal from. It's considered one of the darkest chapters of world history and is heavily discussed to this day. But often when we talk about World War II, we talk about the loss of life, the technology used, the military tactics implemented, without talking about the war crimes committed, especially the crimes against innocent women. Approximately 20 million women were killed throughout the war, and over 1 million were subjected to sexual assault and violence. This strata of society suffered great atrocities and persecution, but unfortunately, their grief is hardly discussed. So, in today's video on History Within Reach, we delve deeper into the atrocities committed against women and children during World War II. What did the Nazis do? Corrie ten Boom was in her mid-40s when she decided to make the boldest move of her life. Despite being from the Netherlands, she and her family helped hide nearly 800 Jews from the Nazis in their home during World War II. But in 1944, the Germans captured her family. Corrie and her sister Betsy were sent to the Ravensbrück concentration camp, where they were about to go through the most brutal experience of their lives. After witnessing the sad death of her sister due to physical and emotional abuse, starvation, and exhaustion, Corrie somehow escaped from the Nazi brutality. But hundreds of thousands of other women were not fortunate enough. Hitler wanted to kill everyone who was not a true German in his eyes. He knew he could kill all the men he wanted to, but it was the Jewish women who actually gave birth to more Jews. So he ordered his soldiers to go after the Jewish women and leave no trace of their existence. But the Nazis didn't want to just end their lives, they wanted to make them go through the most brutal and inhumane atrocities known to mankind. So, in May 1939, the Schutzstaffel, also called SS, a major paramilitary organization of the Nazis, opened Ravensbrück, the largest Nazi concentration camp established for women. Initially made to detain political opponents, it soon turned into sites of mass executions, starvation, and torture beyond imagination. But one camp wasn't enough to systematically torture all women. Ravensbrück was getting overcrowded, and they needed more camps to keep people captive. So, as the war progressed and the Nazis captured more Jewish, French and British women, they established more concentration camps near the town of Auschwitz, Bergen and Belsen. These camps became the ultimate torture and death grounds for women. The Nazis did not just want to kill the people they held captive, they wanted to kill their spirits. Even before sending the women to the dreaded gas chambers in concentration camps, German authorities deployed women in forced labor under conditions that often led to their deaths. Lots of these women also became a subject to unethical medical experiments by the German doctors, which were often extremely painful and life-threatening. Even pregnant women and new mothers were not spared. In fact, they were often among the first groups to be sent to the gas chambers. At various points, the men of the family saw their daughters, mothers, and wives going to the deadly gas chambers and facing horrific deaths. The women who did not meet this fate suffered in a living hell, where they were subjected to sexual assault for even basic necessities like food and water. To further torture and traumatize the captives in concentration camps, the Germans established brothels there and forced the captive women and young girls to work. 500 such brothels were run by the German army for its soldiers, in which women were forced to sexual assault and unending trauma. These brothels experienced a horrifying scheme of torture, rape, and murder in the concentration camps without anyone to protect these women. The Nazis committed great crimes against women, but they were not the only ones. The Allied forces were equally participating in breaking the spirit of societies across Germany by using women as spoils of war. How did the Allies respond? As Allied forces advanced into Germany and other occupied territories during the final months of the war, countless German women became victims of mass rape. Estimates indicate more than 1 million German women were raped during the occupation of Germany by the Soviet Union. This sexual torture was so brutal that historian Antony Beevor referred it as the greatest phenomenon of mass rape in history. Most rapes were committed by the Soviet troops, particularly during the chaotic months leading up to Germany's surrender. Over 110,000 women were raped in Berlin alone during April and May of 1945. The scale of these assaults was staggering. Many victims faced repeated assaults, with some enduring as many as 60 to 70 rapes. Natalia Jess, a Soviet war correspondent at the time, recounted that the Russian soldiers were raping every German female from 8 to 80. This goes on to show the indiscriminate nature of the violence. Women of all ages were victimized, reflecting a broader culture of dehumanization that permeated wartime attitudes. A Soviet officer remarked that their soldiers were so sex-starved that they often raped old women of 60, 70, or even 80 years of age. One survivor recounted being raped multiple times by different soldiers over several days, describing the fear that gripped her community as they faced the advancing troops. The sheer volume of violence was compounded by the breakdown of social order as the Soviet Union army swept through Germany, leaving devastation in their wake. While the majority of sexual violence was attributed to Soviet soldiers, women were also assaulted by troops from other Allied nations, including American, British, and French forces. Estimates suggest that almost 200,000 women's sexual assaults were perpetrated by US troops alone in Germany between 1945 and 1950. Many of these incidents involved gang rapes at gunpoint, where entire families were threatened to coerce women into compliance. In France, women were accused of having relationships with German soldiers. They called it horizontal collaboration. Without any concrete evidence, these women faced public humiliation in the form of public beatings and beheadings. Approximately 20,000 women were publicly shaved, beaten, and even tarred as punishment for perceived betrayal. This widespread abuse was often overlooked in historical accounts, overshadowed by the narrative of liberation that accompanied the Allied victory. The motivations behind these atrocities were complex. Many viewed this as a form of revenge against the German army for its wrongdoings. This mindset was fueled by years of conflict and propaganda that portrayed Germans as enemies deserving punishment. Aftermath. The repercussions of such horrendous persecutions were bone-chilling. Hospital records showed a rise in abortion procedures after the war, highlighting the extreme measures survivors took to deal with their trauma. Approximately 200,000 women died due to complications from rape or related health issues, such as untreated sexually transmitted infections. The psychological impact on survivors was profound and long-lasting. Many women faced not only physical trauma, but also social stigma and shame associated with their experiences. Victims often remained silent about their suffering due to fear of judgment or exclusion from their communities. The trauma affected entire families and communities, creating a legacy of pain that persisted for generations. This dark chapter in history saw the spirit of women across Germany getting shattered by violence and exploitation. Innocent women suffered, and millions of them succumbed to death. The sheer scale of these crimes against women during and after the war serves as a grim reminder of how war can unleash unimaginable violence and suffering on innocent lives. The trauma experienced by these women would take generations to heal, leaving lasting scars on families and communities across Europe.